somebody who's a friend of one of the Team Cherry members made a Reddit thread in, I want to say 2014, saying, hey, my friend quit his job to work on this game after a successful Kickstarter. Here's an early trailer. It actually looks really cool, and I'm super excited for it. And Reddit just tore this thing apart. Like they were just like, oh, great, another cartoony indie platformer, as if we need more of those.
Butterscotch shenanigans.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 537 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's September 4th, Silksong Day, 2025.
Silksong Day. Yeah.
Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show, and we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. So we're gonna talk about Silksong in a little bit. First, we're going to talk about our own stuff because, we got to. Because we have Crashlands 2 Update 1.3 going into beta, I think the day after this episode airs, which would be September 11th. Which is not a great day to do something, but that's just how it lined up.
That's happening.
So I thought we kind of talk a little bit about what we're doing.
So that's just next week. Just like,
yeah,
that's just really coming up. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Somehow I felt like, I don't know. I felt like it was weeks away, but I knew it wasn't. But now that you just said it out loud, I'm like, okay, yeah.
Well, it was.
It was true. It was weeks away.
And then time just kept on marching on.
It wasn't.
So let's talk a little bit about what's in Crashlands 2 Update 1.3, what all we have going on. So the big focus for this update was to respond to the player feedback about just like basically wanting more hard stuff to fight, essentially. A lot of that came in the form of people asking for more bosses. Just boss fights, partially to kind of bring the game into more parity with the original game, which we were able to get more bosses into the first game quicker, just because the game was a lot simpler in terms of like all the different mechanics and how things worked. So
we also needed to, because the game overall was simpler, so it needed more.
Yeah, you needed those moments to kind of like elevate, right? And of course, boss fights are, as we've talked about in the past, they're really, really cool, and they're these big memorable moments for players. But they also have the downside from a development perspective, where they're really expensive to make because they're very choreographed and, they're very tight. But then once you've beaten the boss, then is done. So it's kind of like it's a very brief moment in terms of the overall playtime of the game, but it has an outsized dev cost. So, but we got to give the people what they want.
Got to give them what they want.
And so we've got 5 new side bosses coming in Update 1.3. We're bringing back some references and throwbacks to some stuff from the first game. We got some new weird stuff that's just absolutely
we got a lot
bizarre
of
and stupid
stuff coming up. I mean, the thing is, because they're side bosses, you get to play as much as you want with difficulty, with just ramping everything up a bunch in terms of how insane it is. And so it's a lot of fun to work on, even though they end up being very, very challenging to orchestrate, all of these pieces coming together at once. And it's like we're just ramping up the bullet hell aspect of stuff, ramping up just how chaotic we can make the combat. They turned out really fun. They're a very good time, and especially if you're playing on like legendary mode. Yeah, it's gonna take a moment probably for you to figure out how to defeat those things. So it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, and it's just more opportunities if you're playing on hardcore to just get the crap kicked out of you.
Yeah.
But there was another question that we had for ourselves in thinking about boss fights, where we were like, okay, given that boss fights are what I kind of think of as like disposable in the sense that like you do them and then you're done, right? Is there something else we can do with this idea of giving players a lot more challenging things to fight? That's like it's replayable content. It's not just one and done. And so we married that question with another thing that players wanted, which was the ability to customize gear. So in the first game, I think it was in update 1.2.
Yeah.
I think we added, it was our Juice Mancy patch, where we added this item that opened up like about halfway through the game, or about a third of the way through the game, that allowed you to use these juice crystals that you would find to personalize the stats on your gear, so that you could kind of like slant in one direction or another. The interesting thing about that in the first game was that the first game was so simple in terms of what the stats were doing that most people would just put all, like they would use that system to just put all their stat points into damage reflection.
Yeah.
So that they would just deal 10 times damage back to enemies when they get hit, and they would just let stuff hit them, and then everything just instantly dies with, which is hilarious and great.
That's what's like,
Not very
it's
interesting,
cool.
but very cool and fun. Right?
Yeah, well, it is cool. You just don't want there to only be one of those things that someone could choose to do.
Yeah, there should be more stats that you can that you can play with and stuff. And of course, Crashlands 2 has a lot deeper kind of interactions and how the stats work with different pieces of gear and trinkets and all that stuff. And so we were bringing juice forging back, Juice Mancy, back into Crashlands 2. And then we had that question of, well, we have those juice crystals that you use as like a little currency that you spend to reforge your gear. So where does that come from? So we added this new system called Strange Creatures to Crashlands 2, where we made these really turbo beefed up versions of all the different creatures in the world. They're basically mini bosses where, they're not going to take as long to kill as a full boss, but they have a much more diverse move set. They attack a lot faster. They do wild stuff like they're teleporting around, and they just do all kinds of things that the normal version of that creature does not do. And we even have like special strange creature battle music when you get into combat with one. But the other thing about them is they're kind of scarce in the sense that there's only a couple of them in any given like major region of the world at a time, and they get marked on your map. And they even get marked on your map in places where you haven't yet explored sometimes. So you'll just see one of these little icons out there on the map, and it's like, if you want some good juice, you got to go out there and hunt them down. But that's not all we put into the Strange Creatures, because we also, again, back to the theme of like giving players cooler stuff to do in combat. We also added 2 entire new play styles to the game. One is pet oriented, so it's a Beastmaster set that has 12 items in it. And then another is the Frostbiter set, which is ice and like frost damage oriented. Which has a new special type of attack of like its main weapon, which is like a short range burst of like ice explosion.
Sort of like chucking a snowball sort of effect.
Yeah, you chuck like a exploding snowball. And we added a bunch of new concepts to the game, including like absorb shields and stuff like that to kind of support these new play styles. And then we just like hacked, I want to say like 16 or 17 new items into the Strange Creatures as loot drops. So the Strange Creatures are just like these loot pinatas that just pop up on your map, and if you're brave enough, you can go brawl and go get the loot from them. So I've started my playthrough earlier this week because we spend a lot of time adding content, and then none of it really works until it's all there because it all interacts. So like if we have juice forging, but then we don't have the Strange Creatures to get the juice crystals, then if I did a playthrough, I wouldn't really be testing what it feels like to have juice forging. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
it's about the sum of all the parts, which is
it all interacts.
Yeah, depending on the complexity of the game, this is one of the biggest challenges we had with Crashlands 2, is just the fact that there's so many different systems that all crosstalk, and that's what makes it a really special experience. But it also means that from a playtesting standpoint, from just knowing if it's going to work standpoint, it takes a long time before you get to a point where you can play it and you're like, okay, I see exactly what this is, and I can now judge it appropriately, as opposed to being like, let me just fill in the gaps with my mind.
Yeah, because you can test whether a piece of it is working. So like we tested the juice forging UI and stuff, like just systemically, like, yep, when I click this button, the stats change on my gear or whatever. But that doesn't really tell you anything about what it's going to feel like to actually have that in the game and have that integrated with all the other parts, right? So I've started my playthrough, and I got to say, having those strange creatures popping up, because they pop up once per day. So like once you've cleared out the strange creatures on the map, then they're gone until the dawn of the next day, and then 2 new strange creatures pop up somewhere, right? And I have gotten so sidetracked trying like just hunting strange creatures, where I had quests that like in previous playthroughs, I'd be prioritizing like getting those quests done and kind of moving through, and man, everything else is just languishing because like I just want to go hunt strange creatures. And in part because we have that scramble mode that we added in the last patch, which means that if you're playing in scramble mode, those 16 or 17 items that are in the strange creatures, you have no idea what those are. It's just like a grab bag of just crazy things. And so I want to go hunt those strange creatures as much as possible to build out my kit, But it also creates this circular loop, which is I want to hunt strange creatures to get the items. And to do that, I need to have good gear. So I'm spending all the juice crystals I'm getting from them on my gear to go hunt more of them. And it's just like this. Yeah, it's created like a really nice gameplay loop there.
Yeah, like a little side loop, basically. Because one of the big things that we look at when we're looking at player feedback is basically not just addressing the sort of surface level comment people have. So in this case, it was like the original game had I think 9 side bosses in it. Where's all the side bosses was basically the big question, right, from players. And so we thought,
that's fair.
Yeah, that's fair. But it's not just how do we answer that, not in a way where it's just doing what we did before, which is just like, here's the bosses, but it provides a more, how do we take that an approach where we get to dig into what the players actually want, which in this case is these more interesting opt-in challenges, right, in terms of combat that have higher rewards. If you think about a boss fight, that's essentially what a boss fight is. But how can we do that then systemically where it's not just going to be once a player defeats these 5 new bosses that we've added that they're like, all right, well, that was fun. I guess I'm done with all the new stuff. But how do we get it so it's somehow pervasive, And that's where a lot of the stuff in Crashlands 2 comes from that, which is like looking at feedback from the original game and then not just addressing it with like more stuff.
Basically.
Yeah, of exactly the same kind, but really trying to dig in and answer those questions in a bigger way. And we do see that.
This is the one part of Crashlands 2 that we didn't ask the question. Because like you're saying, so much what we do with Crashlands 2 is say, what do we do in Crashlands 1? How do we do that same concept, but just, better? Mm-hmm. Better, bigger, right? The one exception to that was bosses. We just didn't have, that was the thing where we were like, well, we kind of needed these in Crashlands 1 for all these reasons, but in Crashlands 2, there's so much going on already, we kind of don't need it. So the question the question for bosses wasn't how do we do bosses, but bigger and better. It was, okay, we probably just don't even need this because everything else is so good, right?
Right.
So it is like the one category of the game where that.
Just say we did have 4 bosses at launch. It's not like we didn't have them. It's just.
Oh no, but it was
playing through. It just didn't feel like it. It didn't feel to us like they were missing. Yeah. And even when we beta tested with players and stuff, we just didn't really get too many comments about like, where's all the bugs? Like people were just exploring the world and doing the quests and just like kind of vibing. And it wasn't really until it kind of hit the broader player base that we really started hearing about that.
Right.
And of course, the reason why we're doing this in update 1.3 and not immediately is because this update is taken a couple of months to put together compared to the previous 2, which were 4 or 5 weeks each. And it's just because of the bosses. Because a boss fight also has context to it. Mm-hmm. So like we can, we added these 2 new equipment sets. Each one has 12 special items in it and then its own new custom types of weapons, which is going to be, 7, 8, whatever new weapon items per set. And we can just bang those out pretty fast. Mm-hmm. And especially in this case where we stuffed a lot of those new items into the strange creatures as loot drops, it's like mechanically they work, they're integrated into the game, they feel good, and you're done. You don't have to tell a big story or do something else or change the world to add that item. Once you have a boss fight, that boss, it shouldn't just be sitting there just for no reason with no,
and especially with the case of the Crashlands too, it's like everything big like that has some funky story or some twists or jokes, sort of like layered into it, which I'm really, really, really excited to see how people respond to all the bosses, because they are such ridiculous characters, similar to the original one in terms of each one had its own thing going on that was just kind of crazy, but with Jen's actually good writing in there means that it's just like there's some really funny stuff that we got in there, which I'm pretty excited for people to see.
And some physical comedy as well. There's some situations on these bosses where we were like, okay, we really want this boss to enter into the scene in a certain way that's like hilarious or dumb, but the game just doesn't support that like kind of mechanism that we want to do. And so so we just kind of went in and just hacked it in and just forced it, because we're like, it's got to happen. It's going to be too funny not to do it. So I'm very excited about that. And there's some other kind of other secret stuff that we'll reveal more later. But I mean, the big thing for this patch is just, which we don't actually have a name for the update yet, I don't think. We'll figure that out. But I mean, the big focus is just super fun combat encounters that are very rewarding and that you can just kind of keep engaging with. So give you lots of things to beat up on and get beat up by. That's what's going on. Oh yeah, so we're going to be bringing that into beta on Steam shortly after this episode comes out. I think probably the day after, so Thursday the 11th. And if you've been playing Crashlands 2, or if you played it on launch and you haven't played it in a while, come check out the beta. Give us some feedback. There's a pretty good chance that not quite everything will have its visuals wrapped up by the time we go into the beta. And we won't have it translated because that's also the same time that we're starting localization. So the new content will be English only for a little while. But come into our Discord over at discord.gg/bscotch, and we'll have information in there about how to get into the Steam beta. So otherwise, it's studio news. Talk about Levelhead. So Levelhead, the game we released in April 2020. The Mario Maker style platformer builder game that is our highest rated game on Steam by a pretty healthy margin, that kind of got crushed by Mario Maker in terms of attention and press. We still believe in it. Okay. Yeah. We still think this game,
it's criminal that it did not end up more successful.
Yeah, so we're on the war. We're looking for some arrests. Okay, we're lawyering up. We're going to press charges. Okay, and by that I mean we're putting this game on sale. We're putting this game on a real steep sale on the 27th, and we're trying to turn that into a promotional event where we're gonna be reaching out to lots of streamers and YouTubers, and we're just gonna try to see what we can do to just make something happen and try to make it just so dirt cheap that people be like, I mean,
you gotta give it a shot.
I mean, I gotta buy that. I gotta buy 16 copies of this game for all my friends or whatever, So that's gonna be happening on the 27th, and we also let our Levelhead community know that was coming, because we were like, there's probably going to be some amount of influx of new players coming in, checking out this game. And one of the tricky parts of having a UGC, a user-generated content game like Levelhead, is the longer the community exists, the weirder they get. Yep. Like the more bugs they know about, the more weird techniques that they figured out how to do.
And just the more, I think I would think of it more as extreme than weird, in a sense that like they learn they're all speedrunners basically, right? At that point. And speedrunners don't play games normally or anything close to normally, right?
It's all about the edges.
Good. Yeah, it's all about the stuff that's not supposed to be there, that you're not even supposed to know about. And so many of the levels for the main community that are coming out are things that like you kind of have to be part of the community and have been part of it for a while to even have a guess about, how are you going to approach it or have the skill to do it.
Yeah, it's like going into an arena where you're like the whole thing's been built by PhDs in the thing, and then you're just showing up as a freshman, basically being like, what? It's it's a little challenging for new players in that environment to find levels that they can beat because they don't know the crazy mechanical tricks that are not taught anywhere, in the actual campaign of the game and stuff like that, or not intuitive.
You didn't know they were possible,
right?
Until people
and
figured
even the stuff that's that we like teach in that campaign and stuff. That's still they're still challenging things. Super jumps. Like there are various elements that are designed and aren't edge case things, but are still meant for like, oh yeah, you'll learn how to do this over time as you get better at the game. But people who've been making levels, like those are just core parts of how all the levels are designed, even in the least extreme sort of scenarios. And so we need an influx of new beginner friendly, chiller kind of levels that maybe teach you some of that stuff. Because also we've seen in the past too that our Levelhead community has been very good at coming up with levels where they're like, I want to teach this one. I'm going to take one of these weird ass techniques that we discovered and I want to teach it. I want to make a level that just teaches that. And they're really good at it. So it'll be fun to see what kind of stuff they come up with.
Yeah. And the thing about the Levelhead community is they're amazing. So we put out an announcement saying, hey guys, we're doing this. We're going to have a lot of new players coming in. If you can, make some beginner friendly levels and just like get ready to stock the marketing department.
Thank 'em. Yep.
With all these beginner friendly levels. And literally the day before, the community had already just coincidentally planned on having a like new player friendly level building competition throughout the entire month of September. And so they were already kind of on that train. But when we made that announcement, they just started coming out of the woodwork. Like they're all just so stoked about this idea of not just like the level building challenge, but just having a bunch of new players around that they can build levels for.
Yeah, it's so fun. If you're very into a game or a hobby to have new people showing up, being excited about it, but who are they're fresh faced, they don't know anything. It's so fun to be on that on the welcoming committee for those people.
Yeah,
and they're really taking up the gauntlet on that. So it should be cool to see. Yeah,
so that's again happening on the 27th. So set aside just the tiniest amount of money for this thing. On the 27th. If you haven't played Levelhead or picked it up, be ready for that sale. All right, now we got to talk about Silksong.
No,
because it's happening.
Yeah.
All right, so Silksong is the follow up to Hollow Knight, which came out in 2017. Made by Team Cherry. I believe it came from a Ludum Dare project in 2013, which is a game jam, where I think it's just the character they had there, but it's a totally different game. I looked into this, and hilariously, that game that they made back then, they put it up on Newgrounds. And as they put it, it was bad. It was just a bad game. It had 1 star on Newgrounds. And ever since Hollow Knight, that game now has 4 stars. Just because people are so hyped about the fact that that's the game where the main character of Hollow Knight first appeared.
It's a historical artifact.
Yeah, they're not playing it as a game. They're playing it as a way to understand how Hollow Knight came into being more. And so they're rating it based on something completely different, not
like a cave painting where it's it's not technically good. I mean,
it's technically terrible. Cave paintings,
but it's cool that it exists. Yeah, exactly. Because it's a precursor to stuff. So I believe they worked on Hollow Knight then for over 3 years and got that out in 2017. And it sold, I think, 15 million copies up to this point. It's the number 1 wishlisted game on Steam right now. Silksong is, sorry. And Silksong was originally intended, it was a Kickstarter promise because they kickstarted Hollow Knight and they raised something like $56,000, something like that, which compared to how much money they ended up making was basically zero by comparison.
The comedy of this though, because if you look at any one of these snapshot points for Hollow Knight, where it's their jam game, kind of garbage, didn't really do anything. Everyone's like,
it's just like unremarkable thing after unremarkable thing.
Yeah, the Kickstarter and the Kickstarter, technically, if you make like, around $50,000 or $60,000 a Kickstarter, it's fantastic, right? But it's not the blowout ones where you see games raise $2-3 million, right?
So
again,
this
it's
was
just
back in 2014, I think they did their Kickstarter,
kinda
which
heyday
was
of
like
this
a little
stuff,
bit more of the heyday of like, it was a bit easier to raise money, I feel like, in gaming back then on Kickstarter.
So
But,
we talk a lot about like you cannot tell exactly which things are going to pop off, right? And I feel like this is such a fantastic example of exactly that, which is like at every one of these verification points, if you were like a publisher looking at this, you'd be like,
nope.
nah, not gonna do it. Oh, another Metroidvania. Nah,
well,
not gonna do it.
somebody compiled a bunch of Reddit comments
It's the best.
because somebody who's a friend of one of the Team Cherry members made a Reddit thread in, I want to say 2014, saying, "Hey, my friend quit his job to work on this game after a successful Kickstarter. Here's an early trailer. It actually looks really cool, and I'm super excited for it." And Reddit just tore this thing apart. Like they were just like, "Oh, great, another cartoony indie platformer." As if we need more of those. How about you tell your friend not to quit his day job and to throw this game in the garbage where it belongs? Like people were literally saying that. And then it turns out to be one of the most beloved games of all time. Because Sam and I were chatting about this yesterday, and like, man, it's so easy to just be a hater.
Man.
It takes no effort to just shit on things and not do anything productive yourself.
Well, it takes no courage, I think. You know what I mean? Like, because if you say something looks, like, oh, like this looks like it's interesting, and I hope they do great with it. It doesn't take you anything to instead say, and basically not put your neck out for something, right? Where you just get to be like, this is terrible, ha ha ha. Like this, the internet just is full of that kind of vibe with regards to any kind of frankly new anything, new art, new game, new music, whatever. It's like
it's cringe, everything's cringe.
It's just like,
people trying is cringe.
Yeah, and it's like, oh my gosh, you hope these things don't sink in to the people creating them, because otherwise you wouldn't have stuff like Hollow Knight. Just straight up, if someone read that thread and was like, wow, I guess I should stop working on this because it's trash.
Well, because the dumb thing about it is, if somebody's making something and you see it and you're like, that seems too similar to stuff that I've already seen, I'm not really interested in it. To then take the next step and argue that it shouldn't even exist.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, look, we've got enough music. There's been so much music that's been made. Mm-hmm. Like, people just quit making music, guys. Just listen to what we already have. We're done with music now, That's a crazy, crazy stance to take. And it's also crazy with games, because you never know what kinds of interesting things people are going to come up with, even if they're operating in what you might feel like is a genre or a space that's been saturated by, you might think everything's been played out, everything has already been done. And then some genius comes along and just blows your mind with new stuff that you never thought possible, So that's been kind of interesting to see a lot of these recaps of the path that Hollow Knight took. But then in their Kickstarter, they were planning on having an additional playable character as a DLC. I think one of the problems with that is Hollow Knight's a Metroidvania. I think it has like 140 something enemies and like 30 something boss fights.
It's huge. It's a huge game. Yep.
And especially in an action platformer like that, everything is really finely tuned mechanically around what the character is capable of. And so if you bring in a new character,
it's also Metroidvania. So as you go through the game, everything's finely tuned towards everything's
towards that progression.
Yeah, it's all fully tuned around the main character.
Actually.
Right? And how that character progresses, which is really complicated to keep track of already. Adding a second fucking character to that, it's wild.
No, yeah. And here's the thing, as like we were just saying, somebody might figure that out. Somebody might figure out how to pull that off. Team Cherry were like, this is actually just needs to be a separate game, which I think is correct, right? Because because you need to tune the game around what the character can do. And so Silksong just became that second game. And also to Team Cherry's credit, they they let all their Kickstarter backers know, hey, we're just going to send you a free copy of Silksong because this was supposed to be the DLC that you were going to get as a backer because you backed the game. So they're just sending that out, which is cool because, that Kickstarter was a long time ago. Yeah. And they're still
It's also funny because I think there's just like 2,000, it's like less than 2,000 people total for the Kickstarter. And now you're talking about if they're at the top of the, like literally number one wish list on Steam, means that they have multiple millions of wish lists, right? Because as you climb up to that very, very top of that, I don't know what the order of magnitude is, but I know it's very, very high. So,
those 2,000 people, it's going to be a fraction of a percent of the people.
Oh, yeah, it's not going to matter. It's a blip.
Yeah, but they're going out of the way to make sure that those are the people who believed in the project early and made it happen. Because, if that Kickstarter hadn't happened, who knows? Who knows what would happen? So Silksong then has so much attention that I think it's been a little bit overblown in terms of people talking about games canceling their releases. But some games have postponed their releases because it was conflicting with Silksong. If you were to go into like the gaming subreddit or whatever, it sounds like every game is canceling or moving their release to make way for Silksong. According to the How to Market a Game website, only 7 games did that, but they just got a lot of attention for doing it.
That's a lot of movement that has to happen.
It is.
Because moving, I think there's a bunch of parts to this, right? Because one of them is the reason everybody wants to talk about it is because it adds to everyone's belief that this is such an epic event that's happening, right? So if anything they can point at to be like, look at this, right? They're like, look, these other games are like, I better move out of the way, right? It just adds to the hype of this thing coming out. But it also, if you're in that position of trying to get attention on a game, even if it isn't the case that there's a conflict there, which we're probably going to talk about, but even if there isn't, if you want to get people to talk about your game, right? That's a good way to do it because if you do something like that, everyone's going to talk about that. So there, like all these games that they announced that they're delaying, I had never heard of. Now I've heard of all of them, right?
And that's something that they found in the How to Market a Game blog post. They broke down how all these games that moved their release date, those announcements got, in some cases, hundreds or thousands of times more views on TikTok and YouTube and whatever else than any other marketing material, like marketing promotional efforts these companies have done. There was a snapshot of one post that was just like, what do you do when your game conflicts with Silksong? And it was this company announcing their game being moved, and it got 1.5 million views.
Yep. Yeah. So honestly, a useful tactic for writing a current trend line, which you normally can't, because like if you're saying like, if you're going to move it out of the way because some giant AAA game was launching, maybe not GTA 6, because like even AAA is moving out of the way of that, but like as an indie, if you were like, oh, I don't know, there's some new Star Wars games coming out, so we're going to move ours, everybody would be like, why? Like those are two. You aren't in the same pool, But the fact
that even if they understand why, it's that people don't care. People aren't looking for evidence that something is really important and big, right? When it comes to like a AAA launch, they're just like, that's part of the yearly cycle of life. Is huge big budget AAA games get launched. That's just what happens, and it makes sense. You're like, other games should probably not launch at the same time. It just makes sense to people, right? Mm-hmm. But when they then move a release date because of that, nobody actually cares though, because that wasn't evidence of something that they really desperately wanted to be true. Because the reality is like when you're bought into a hype cycle like this, you want it to be true. You want it to be true that the world has frozen in place because Silksong is releasing, right?
Well, and every piece
of evidence towards that, you want that to be true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it feels cool to think that like everybody else is as hyped as you are.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels like you're part of
cultural
something.
Zeitgeist, it's a moment for everybody to experience like together. So it has its own special thing going on top of like however good the game is. It's going to be its own thing, but the fact that everybody who is excited about it gets to be excited like with the world, that's just a really fun. It's a really fun feeling.
These kinds of things don't happen that often. No. We're like so many people are this stoked about one thing happening at one point in time. Mm-hmm. And so I played Hollow Knight back in the day. I didn't play it too much, but I want to play Silksong.
Yeah,
like,
of course.
just because like I want to be part of it. I want to be part of the crew. But then there's that kind of interesting question, which is, all right, if you're one of these games that postpones because of Silksong, where do you go? Where do you postpone to? And most of them were planning on releasing, obviously, on September 4th. And so they don't want to postpone to like November, December, or something like that. So they are generally postponing by just 2 or 3 weeks. So just kind of toward the end of September. Basically right when Levelhead is going to go on sale. You know what I mean? Because that's got to happen. But that means that they're going, it's like out of the frying pan into the fire, because they're going from competing with Silksong, which is hard because that's one game that's going to suck up all the oxygen out of the room, to now competing with tons of games, because that end of September happens to be an incredibly busy time, and it's bumping right up against the autumn sale for Steam. So a lot of games are releasing ahead of the autumn sale. So there's a huge spike in releases at that point. And then people's money tends to go into the Steam sales. And if you're releasing and you're not on sale, then you're not part of the event, and that's it.
You are releasing and on sale. You're probably not doing a steep discount, because it's really weird to release your game into a steep discount,
like half price or
so
something.
so everyone's going to be soaking up all the money's going to get soaked up by the Steam sales at that time. So it's a hard. That's a hard needle to thread. I'm not really sure how that's going to.
Yeah. And I don't know what we would like if we were in this position. Like, let's say we were releasing Crashlands 2 on September 4th, and we were like, oh God, now it's Silksong. I don't know what we would do.
I don't know.
Like,
I think we probably would punt, but I think the reasoning is really important, which is that a lot of the talk I've seen around like why you would punt your launch a little bit later, a lot of it's oriented around players, around like purchases or whatever else. But
we just do it for the press.
Yeah,
like,
it's actually far less of a concern. It's mainly the fact that like it is so hard to get like the YouTuber press, the Twitch core of people, all those people to actually write anything about your game or play it and show it to people. Basically, the secondary layer of all this attention. It really is the case that with Hollow Knight, with Silksong being present all of a sudden, and even in this, like it's already started happening like the previous week, where people who are like YouTubers or everywhere else are like, I'm going to replay. There's Twitch streamers like, I'm going to replay Hollow Knight, right? And we had the same thing happen with Levelhead with Mario Maker, which is like Super Mario Maker 2 got announced, and it was just the instant it was announced, then there was all the way up until the lead up of its launch, which I think was 6 months away at the time. Then everybody who had played it, who we were talking to about playing Levelhead, was like, oh, I'm going to go back and like do my final play of all this Mario Maker stuff. And so we just got
it fully resurrected the Mario Maker community.
Yeah. And you see the same thing already. It's already happened, right, with Hollow Knight this past 2 weeks.
And it's basically anybody who would play or review indie games, streamers and press, right? Anybody who is willing to do that, because a lot of people still only play AAA, right? But even them, some of them, anybody is going to be playing Silksong. Yes. It's the only thing they'll be playing, right? And because also of how Team Cherry is doing this, which is they're not giving press early access at all. Because usually the cycle is 2 to 6 weeks ahead of your launch, you give keys to press so that they can play the game, prep their reviews, like already be ready to go so they can put their reviews out on day one or put a preview out, the day before or whatever, right? Team Cherry said no, they're not doing any of that. They're just releasing
wish list in the world.
Which also means that everybody who wants to cover this game, and everybody wants to, because that's also where all the ad money is going to be going into coverage of this game, right? So but that means that everyone's going to be panicked, scrambling, starting really yesterday, right? But today, since today is the release day, they're going to be panicked, scrambling to try to get coverage done, and it's going to soak up all of their time for the next few days as they're like trying to figure out what is
they're not playing anything else.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah. So because usually what you're competing with when you're trying to get attention on something is you're competing for time, right? And that's true for your players as well, but it's for when it comes to press and streamers, it's particularly true that you're trying to find a time when you can be like, hey, check out my game. And they're like, well, I've got 100 other requests to check out these other games, right? And 3 of them are AAA titles I have to cover so we can get ad revenue to our site, right? And then there's the million others that I got to figure out, how do I find time to cover these things? So you're competing for attention so that they even know you exist and want to play your game on stream or cover it in press, whatever, covering all of that, but then they still have to have time to do it. Yeah. And if they don't have time, and we heard this about Levelhead, we heard about Crashlands, because Crashlands 2 is a huge game, and we heard from multiple people that we reached out to, like, I just don't have time to play enough of this game that I could give it a review. So I'm basically just passing, right? And for Levelhead, it was the same deal. People told us like, yeah, I gotta be doing Mario Maker stuff because Mario Maker 2 is coming out. I can't slot in Levelhead stuff because it'll take away from the content I need to produce to get those clicks for Mario Maker, right?
Yeah. So if it was us and we had the same like launch day problem, the reality is that if you just wait a week, then a lot of that has subsided because again, like there is so much stuff happening in the game space that people do need, like press, even YouTubers, Twitch streamers, whatever else, need to move through their games, like new game content, whatever else, pretty rapidly actually. So I think at max you would probably need, I'd probably wait 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that.
I don't know.
Let things settle.
Because the job of press is to get clicks. Like people say, okay, their job is to like write about games. It's like, no, they're just going to write about whatever people want to read about, because that's, if people search, whatever people are searching for, they want to be at the top of the search results that week.
How they get paid, right?
Yeah, and so they don't get paid if they write an article about an upcoming game that doesn't have that many wish lists. They get paid if they write about Silksong, right? And I feel like that's going to be true for at least a couple of weeks, because
Silksong is probably going to be big enough if it's anything like
there's going to be guides and walkthroughs and just tips and tricks.
That is always true, though, in a way that you can't even predict. So, just like we're talking about with people not realizing that this game is going to be huge, in its early days, it's like it's like Balatro showing up out of nowhere. You think your launch day is safe, right? And you have to line up so many things to do it, but you don't know when some other game is just going to arrive and soak up all the.
We had Blueprints was the one that basically was competing with Crashlands 2, right? Which is, we didn't really know much about, but in the lead up to Crashlands 2, all of a sudden, all I was seeing anywhere was shit about Blueprints, right? It was the only thing I was seeing at all. And we didn't realize how much of the indie side of press and streamers and so on was completely soaked up with that game. So, I mean, you're right. You can't predict when these things are going to happen necessarily, but sometimes there are some that you can just see, like, Hollow Knight, right?
Well, I think that's the thing is like you can't see it though, right? Because they announced it 2 weeks ago. So that to me is the biggest thing. And like we talked about this with like Oblivion's remaster dropping, like Shadow dropping on the same day that Claire Obscure did. There's these things where it's like you have these entities that are already, as far as how much attention they have, like they have already collected a tremendous amount of it, right? And that allows them to not have to bother with, like you said, getting press keys out, having a long cycle before the launch day actually happens. You can wait until you're like, okay, yeah, we're actually done. No, we can just kick it out. Let's just kick it out in 2 weeks, which is dope. It's great for the team that can do it, right? It's really rough though because you can't get out of the way, really, if you're a small
it's
team.
Really a jerk move for the rest of the indie.
Yeah, it's tough. It's like no one can get out of the way fast enough, and the reality is that like every week that your team exists burns money, right? And so if you have to punt a game launch by, let's say you're saying, oh, we need to wait like a whole month or something because this is just going to take a long time to die down. One, you're betting that like there's not going to be something else showing up right at the tail end of that, which is a gamble by itself.
Yeah, there will be. It won't be Silksong though.
You won't know about it. So there's that. Yeah. And then you're basically betting that like the amount of revenue that you've burned in a whole month is more than what you would have lost by the launch, which I think is like that's a really interesting. A really important note is like that that's the math you got to do. If it takes, let's say let's say your team costs, tiny team costs you like $20,000 a month or something like that to run, and you're selling your game for, $10, $20, something like that. You can do the math on it and be like, do we think this is realistically, will it hit us so hard that we are going to lose X amount of dollars in sales, right? Or that the initial velocity of our game is going to be hit so hard that that it'll kind of kneecap it in some interesting way going forward.
And that would be more of my worry is the permanent impact on, because it's the case that your initial launch is so much of what drives like the scale of its success, right? Is so much of what drives all of your future sales. or I guess drives it, or is just a measurement of what it's going to look like, right? Like those don't have to be the same. There's not, the general interpretation people have is that like, oh yeah, you get your launch, that's your initial visibility basically, right? And so people's sort of general awareness and interest in your game comes from that moment. And so everything else after that is kind of a multiplier.
It's just because it's harder to get attention back on your game after the launch moment, right?
Yeah, because it's talking about the past, right? Everything about games visibility is oriented around its launch, and none of it's oriented around now your post-launch, except for in Steam's case, sales.
Done well, like unless the sales have done really well. So,
So it's going to be tricky to navigate, like for everybody involved. And there's no clear answers. Right?
I do hope in this case, because for those people who are punting, because it's an abnormal case for somebody, like nobody should ever point at Hollow Knight or Silksong and be like, see, they did it. Like they are an exception to any rule you could come up with, right? But I do hope that the people who are punting and got all this attention because they're punting, and all of them did a really good job of, because at least all the announcements that I saw had the right tone of being like, oh, hey, surprise, Silksong's coming out. Like, we're surprised, everyone's surprised. That's dope though. But we are gonna scoot on out of the way, right? And so none of them said what is also true, which is this was kind of a jerk move to just drop that on everybody.
We've talked about this in the past where games have just suddenly said, hey, we're releasing in 2 weeks, and or even in some cases just the shadow drop, like, hey, it's out right now. It just suddenly it's launched, Yeah, because if you're the company that has such a following that you just don't need to do any marketing and you could just drop whatever you want whenever you want and it just sucks up all the oxygen, then I get it, because why would you go through the effort of setting deadlines for yourself and trying to hold yourself to them and coordinating with press if you don't have to do any of that stuff and you could just whenever the game's ready you just release it. It does really suck for everybody else though, who don't have that.
Yeah, but my hope is because all these people who are punting handled it so gracefully, and then also again because of this, we're not going to see a hype cycle. I can imagine their hype cycle like this for another upcoming game, right? Eventually we'll have one, but this is the biggest hyped game that I remember ever seeing.
GTA 6 would be the best.
Yeah, GTA 6. Well, yeah, and that's another tier entirely, right? But these are super rare that you have this level of hype. And this hype does have these weird effects. And so the fact that somebody could actually hold on to the hype, right, and actually use it so that when they move their game launch, they get to use that in a way that like taps into that hype potentially. Yeah. My hope is that these games that are moving out of the way, making these announcements, or even the ones that are announcing that they're not, either way, the ones that are publicly saying something but being gracious about it, right, that they get to tap into it a little bit and end up, hopefully, with actually better launches than they would have. Because I do think that that's possible in this very specific case. That I think that's possible.
Well, you might even have Silksong fans, because they're all making announcements saying, because of Silksong, we don't want to be in the way of Silksong. We want to just clear the path, blah blah blah. I could almost guarantee that at least some number of Silksong fans who are seeing these games, sort of respecting the game that they are excited about, will go and at least like follow or wish list some of those games on
exactly.
Steam,
Yeah. Yeah. So it might actually turn out to be, I think this is why it's so weird, is like, normally I would just call this unambiguously a jerk move to do this, like this sudden drop and just with that tight of a window and just kind of just obliterate everybody else's plans, right? Yeah. But because of just how weird this one is and like had the degree of hype, but also the degree of positivity, right? Because GTA 6, not a positive community, right? So like I would be worried about trying to tap into whatever is going on there, right? All Night, it's just a generally quite positive, just very excited community that's been making itself more excited, like rapidly excited over the past 7 years, right? But in a way that hasn't turned negative, which is truly amazing, like beyond belief, right? Because almost any fandom turns negative, no matter what it's a fandom of. Could be literally anything. Could be a child's TV show, right? Like it eventually turns really negative and hostile. And somehow that just didn't happen here, right? So again, like to me, this is a weird in games. This is a weird historical moment that is just very cool and very interesting. Kind of, sociologically, just like what is going on here? Have we seen anything like this before? Will we see anything like it again? And I think probably no.
It's rare, not for quite a while. Yeah. So yeah, I'm curious to see, in the coming months in retrospect to hear from some of these games that got punted, if they write up any postmortems or talk about what ended up happening as a consequence of this. Because I do feel like in some cases Hollow Knight players will find these games because of Silksong, and then it'll help those games. All right, well, we have time for one question, probably. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. So if you'd like to get your question onto a future episode, head on over there. And also you can upvote questions so you can help guide which questions we answer. Now, the highest upvoted question comes from Chalosis, who says, did you develop automated tests for Crashlands 2? All right.
Yes.
So automated, yeah.
Yes
so,
and no.
Yes, short answer.
Yeah.
So when it comes to testing games and testing code, there's a lot of different philosophies that you can take, and you can take those philosophies to like small degrees, or you can kind of go stupidly overboard with them, kind of depending. So the most basic is something that's just called a unit test, where if you have a function that just does something like add an item to my inventory, right? So you got an inventory system, and you need something in the code that'll allow you to put stuff into the inventory, right? So that function that does that is a pretty basic function that's not going to have a lot of code in it, and you can then create a test for it where you basically write a little like mini program that adds stuff to your inventory and then queries the inventory to be like, is the item in there like I expect it to be? Right. And if it is and everything looks good, then your test passes and you're good. So that's a unit test because that little function that you wrote that's a unit. It's just like a little piece of the code, and you're just testing that one function that adds stuff to the inventory.
Yeah.
So
as the idea of something, you being able to do that is the question of whether the thing that you're writing is testable, right? Can you test it in such a way, right? And so when I'm writing code, a lot of what I'm doing all the time is as I'm like constructing something that does something really complicated, is then at some point I'm like, crap, I have to figure out how to test this, right? And because it's doing so many things, or because it's like mutating something somewhere else or whatever, it starts to get really hard to figure out how do I actually like represent this in tests, right? And so to do that, you basically have to like start to break it apart again to try to pull out again these units that then are individually testable, so that hopefully the net result, even if you can't test the main, like the whole thing, which is what happens in games, right? Is you can't test the whole thing in the same way because it's so complicated. And the question is if you rely on just unit tests, how far does that get you?
If all the units work as intended in all scenarios, and then you piece it's kind of like Legos, right? Like if every Lego brick is honed down to the micron and is perfect, then you can build whatever you want with them and it should be fine, right? Right? Maybe. So we do have unit tests in Crashlands 2 for a lot of the core underlying game systems. Those unit tests only run on like a developer version of the game. We don't, like when you boot up the game as a player, we don't run all that extra code because it would just add to the boot time of the game. But we do have those, and we also have we just call it a smoke test, which is just like look for anything wrong. And this is an automated test where when we make new builds of the game, so we increment the version number, and we have a pipeline that it'll create all the different versions of it. So it'll create a Steam version and an Android version and an iOS version, and it'll upload those versions to the different platforms. But before it does that, we have a robot basically that boots up the game and starts playing the game a little bit just to look for any crashes or anything weird going on, and make sure that, if you follow this certain sequence of steps, that you get the same result. right? And
It's
that helps us
basically the does it work at all test, right?
yeah. We for Levelhead, we actually have a lot more sophisticated stuff that our QA team has done, where we have little robots that like actually plays Levelhead, like it'll boot up the game, and we have these pre-made levels, and it'll beat the level and do all kinds of stuff like that. So we do some amount of automated testing, and what I was saying earlier that like you can really go overboard with some of these things, where we could have tried to put together some kind of an automated test that not just like boots up Crashlands 2, runs the unit tests, and then does a little bit. Like we could have tried to make some kind of a bot that literally plays Crashlands 2 and try to simulate a player, you know. I've seen GDC talks of studios that have done this kind of a thing, and maybe if you've got the dev slack to do it, maybe it's worth it. But I feel like in our case, we have a QA team, we have QA testers who are people, and they can do that without us needing to program them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, and again, it comes down to the test a bit. Like, what does it mean for a thing to be testable, right? And that comes down to basically interaction and world complexity, right? Like, what are all the things that can happen? Because you have to, because your little whatever your test is itself is also a program. It's also code, right? And if it doesn't work properly, you're going to get weird outcomes. And like as a simple example of this, you hear this in the web a lot, because the web is basically it's just UIs, right? And one of the kinds of tests that people will do sometimes is basically a visual one, where they'll run through and take literal snapshots. Like, here's an image of what I did, this sequence of clicks. I clicked on these links, whatever, landed on a page, and I wait, 20 milliseconds, and I take a screenshot, right? And then you just pixel by pixel can run that same test again and ask, does it look the same as the snapshot that I took that one time and stored, right? Okay, what if you slightly change the color or something, right? What if that 20 milliseconds randomly wasn't quite long enough, and like something is in the wrong position because it hasn't fully rendered yet, right? There's a million things that can go wrong that aren't. So we call these fragile tests, right? Because they break, even though the underlying thing that you're testing is totally fine. Because you don't actually care, does it literally look exactly like that screenshot? What you care about is, did the changes I make behave the way that they're supposed to, which is a different question. So you have to be really careful how you're testing these things. And when it comes to automated tests for games, if you like program a robot to like run through a level or run through the game and interact with stuff, then you have to ask, okay, well, what happens when I change the stuff? Right? On purpose. What does it mean then to update the robot so that it properly tests that change, right? And for something that, as things get more complicated, the reality of that is you're going to be spending as much time writing your little test robot as you are writing the game. And you see this in test in general, where if your tests get too specific and too disconnected from the reality of what your changes look like how often are you making changes? What do the changes do? What are the extent of them? So especially like early in development when a lot's changing all the time, then all you're doing is just rewriting your tests over and over and over and over again, right? And so it's a delicate balance to strike of what do I test? When do I test it? How do I test it just enough that I have high confidence that things are fine, but not so aggressively that it becomes immutable and I can no longer change the thing that I'm working on.
Yeah.
And so this is where, for something as complicated as a game, or really anything complicated, this is where QA, actual people are really handy, because they'll look at a thing and be like, and they can just tell, yeah, this worked, right? They don't have to ask like, does this look exactly the same as it used to or whatever? They can just go interact with it and know if it worked.
People have vibes. They're like, something's off.
Yeah.
And you don't have to instruct every possible outcome. And I've also
that's the
heard
other thing too, right? Is like the degree to which you have to, think about Crash. If anybody who's played Crashlands 2, think about how you would express all of the things that have to happen. Like click this exact thing, do this exact, hit this button for this many seconds, whatever, right? Like, just have a person do it.
And a lot of games are built on randomness, Yeah. Like some of the things that make them fun and replayable is when things don't happen as the player expects every time, right? If you're trying to make a test for it, then in some cases you would need to like purposely constrain the randomness so that it always gives the same outcome. But now you're not testing the game. You're
But also
just
sometimes
testing
you can't
something else.
do that because if the thing like Crashlands 2 is complicated enough that you can't meaningfully, even if you just like say like I'm gonna set the random seed to always be the same for my tests, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it'll literally be the same experience every time, right? Because there's going to be slight variation in order of operations depending on some clock speed thing. They're like the stuff gets complicated really fast to the point where you can't just say this is how it is exactly how it's supposed to be if there's any randomness involved.
My favorite part of this too, though, is that like it's just there is a lot of value in unit tests, but I think it's also the case that you can obviously miss stuff, right? Like you're always going to miss stuff because, like any piece of work, there's always more things you could test, right? And so a common example of this from the 1.3 patch is Seth got the Juice Mancy Forge all working and is pouring these crystals into. He's collected 100 crystals, goes and start dunking them in there. And this has all been working for weeks, right? No reports from QA. I played with it. Everyone's played with it. Everyone's like, yeah, this thing works. You can upgrade your stuff. You can spend your crystals, whatever. Seth just so happens to spend his last crystal, which nobody had done because, of course, you have to do a specific thing at a specific cost when you have a certain quantity of crystals to be able to zero it out.
Because usually you've got like too few left over to do anything with, but not zero.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so, again, it's one of those things where it's like, you wouldn't necessarily, you can write a test for like, do I collect these? Do I spend them? If I spend one, does it spend one? Whatever. But there's always a hole.
The reason is actually is not about not being able to spend them. It's a psychological thing, which is
you just don't. Yep.
There is one thing you can do for one juice crystal, which is fully re-roll the stats on an item.
Yeah.
But you generally don't do that when you only have one crystal left, because if you don't get the stats you want, then now the item is fucked.
Right. You want to be able to re-roll it. So you want to have a bunch.
So you'll tend to not ever spend that last juice crystal. You'll just sit on it and so you can bank it. And I just YOLO'd it in my playthrough. I was like, this item sucks bad enough with the stats. I'm just going to re-roll it anyway just to see if I get something good, And sure enough, something broke.
But this is also a good QA person is like why it's such a skilled job is because you're trying to think of like all of you're trying to understand how the thing works so that you can guess like all of the ways that something could go wrong, right? And because what happens when something goes to zero is the most classic like QA/testing problem, right? Is what happens when a thing goes to zero. And this is also why QA for games is really challenging because you're doing this combination of like play testing it to feel if the vibes are good and feel if it's a good experience. And you're trying to test like the actual way that the thing works and is it behaving? And because of also how complicated this stuff can get, especially for a game like Crashlands 2, having any guesses whatsoever, like guessing that at zero something bad might happen, because like you started with zero, right? So guessing that something bad might happen at zero isn't necessarily something that you do, right? And it's also part of why QA is such an exhausting and like detail-oriented discipline, right? Is because it's something like if you're programming writing tests, it's the same thing. It's like it's tedious as fuck, right? Because you'll sit down and be like,
all the ways things could go wrong and try to write a test that predicts those and checks for them.
Yeah,
right.
And then you get to do it again because then there's the idea of a regression, which is something used to work and now it doesn't, right? So, and we actually had this happen because we do before we do a release, we do a full what we call cert, right, where we basically take all the platforms. Guidelines and requirements and make sure like test everything, make sure they all pass, right? And there was something, I can't remember what it was, there was some item in there that has never failed the test for like 3 years or something, right? Since the test came into being, so it has never failed the test. It's been tested every time for 3 years, and then finally actually caught a regression, right? And Jordan, our lead QA, was then like kind of laughing about it. He was like, I've been so tired of like repeating these tests over and over again, and I keep on thinking like, do I really need to, And then it catches something, right? Again, 3 years later of fully passing this test.
In this case, the test was literally just cycle through all the languages and make sure that they're there, right?
Oh yeah.
And there was a translation upload error where English.
They gave us the wrong Spanish file, so that
they just gave us the original English back and flagged it as Spanish. So if you flip the game to Spanish, suddenly it's back into English again. And so, yeah, if the test is just, click through these different languages and make sure they're all good, it's because our pipeline is fine. We got the whole thing under control. And it's like, nope, something fell through the cracks, So yeah, you gotta have those regression tests. But as kind of a final note, have you guys heard the joke about like the QA tester in the bar? I feel like this is such a good example.
Yeah,
It's classic. Yeah.
So a QA tester walks into a bar and orders a beer, and then he orders 2 beers, and then 30 beers, and then -5 beers, and 0 beers, and infinity beers, and then a water, and then a soda. Everything's great. QA tester walks out, no problem. A customer walks in, asks where the bathroom is, and the building catches on fire. Which the joke is like, it's not just about thinking in the scope of the exact constraints of the problem. It's also thinking sort of several layers out from that of all the possible things that might happen in that same type of scenario and making sure that you've accounted for them.
Yeah. And also that's like, it's one of the most challenging things. We talked about this in the past too, with Crashlands 2, about one of the things that was such a surprise to us that created just innumerable problems at release was people kept on running into these cases where they just like would find themselves having done something very weird that we absolutely did not account for. And it was because they just were not reading. They were just refused to read any of the stuff that was ever on screen. Dialogue, tool, they read nothing, right? And they somehow just kind of stumbled through the game on vibes, right? And then would end up in situations that were possible in the game, but we didn't plan for, because none of our beta testers who play the game because they love the game and wanted to and read everything, right? None of our QA, because they're using all of the other, because they're basically testing the stuff. They're testing the quest, like do the quest work, all that kind of stuff, right? And so the idea that people would like, because it's like in the early game, you get access to a few key things like floors, right, or bridges, like extremely early, but only if you actually do what the quest tells you 5 minutes in, right? And there were people who just didn't, and they played the game for hours, and they didn't have access to that. And then because they didn't, they just started to do very weird stuff, right? And you can't always play, like we didn't plan for the question of like, what happens if somebody doesn't read anything? Because it also, how do you even test that? What does it mean? Like, how do you predict what that means?
Or do you even need to do anything about that? That's always the follow on, right? Yeah.
Well, there's a way you can do it, which is, this is something that I chatted with our QA team. We kind of came up with this idea of essentially role playing, which is like, you can do a playthrough where you take on a persona, where you say like, I'm the hostile player. Anything the game tells me to do, I will not only not do it, I'm going to do the opposite of what the game tells me to do, kind of out of spite. Game tells me to click on one thing.
Try to find 5 opposites to the thing, 5 completely opposites to the thing.
Yeah, like wherever the game tells me to go, I'm going the other way, just every single time. And then trying to take it. And this gets more and more difficult the more you know about the game. So like trying to play the game as a non-reader, like trying to play the game as somebody who doesn't know what's happening when you definitely
you
do
can't
know
stop
what's happening.
knowing what you know.
Yeah, so that's where things get really difficult. But you can kind of role play these different personas of different types of players that behave in specific ways, which does make it easier to kind of get into that mode of testing things in unusual ways, But yeah, testing is a very difficult, and like you can never test everything. You just can't. It's a lot. But
yeah, I think that's why smart testing and smart QA is so important, because it's all about trying to figure out what are the most likely things you need to deal with, because you can't possibly test everything. You can't. There's too much, especially once you get into anything with combinatorial complexity like you have with a lot of video games, right? Because it's literally impossible. It's literally impossible for like the scale of the universe and time, right, to come up with like testing every possible thing that could happen.
Like testing every chess move.
Yeah,
right.
It's
like,
literally impossible. And so you have to have other strategies for how you come up with tests rather than just test as much as you can. It has to be, what are the kinds of things that can go wrong? What are the kinds of things that people will do? And so it's this really complicated psychological thing of like, how do people work? And it's this really complicated understanding of like the underlying thing so that you can make even guesses about the kinds of things that can go wrong. It's very difficult.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, our strategy, unit tests, smoke tests, a little bit of automated testing, and then try to rely on on good QA and playthroughs. So a lot of different layers to it, but it's working pretty well for us so far. All right, well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate to support the podcast, and links to the archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam, Google Play, and the App Store and pick up copies of Crashlands 2, Levelhead, Crashlands, all of our stuff. We got lots of games. Go check them all out. And if you've been playing stuff, give it a review. That helps us out a lot. We appreciate it. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye. You gotta
Move your hairs.
Move those lips and toes.
You gotta just go, you know? Get going.
Is that an enunciation exercise? I don't know if that's gonna help you get your consonants under control. Helps you project though. You know?
Oh yeah, it's not about consonants.
Project. And you got to get practice just moving your fucking face.
Your fucking face.
Your
Move your
fucking
fucking face.
face.
Okay.